At President Claudine Gay is stepping down. You can see her on the screen there. That was that infamous testimony. This is a big deal. It looked like she was not going to step down. It looked like she was digging in her heels. It looked like the Board of Overseers at Harvard was digging in their heels. Of course, she had the big plagiarism scandal on top of what she said at that hearing. Apparently, it was too much, either for her, either for the board. We don't know the details there yet, but this is a big, big deal.
It's shocking, and I'm a little surprised by it, because the last we heard before we went into the holiday, the New Year's holiday, that is, she was lawyering up and she was digging her heels in, refusing to resign. This was also after there were accusations that she plagiarized multiple times. And so the situation just kept snowballing and getting worse for her, and the worse it got, the more persistent she was. But you've had people like Bill Ackman, investor, philanthropist, also an alum at Harvard, that has been very vocal about everything going on there, really saying this president must step down, as we saw from the likes of the Penn president a few weeks earlier. So, you know, I guess the pressure was just a little too much for her, Lydia.
Yeah, and, you know, she hasn't been president of Harvard very long at all, just about half a year, 6 months or so. And this raises a lot of questions because, as you said, she was really digging her heels in. You have to wonder, is she now finally resigning because of that terrible testimony that she offered on Capitol Hill? Or is this really a consequence of the plagiarism and the journalism around that that's really forcing her now out? And you also have to wonder, is Harvard actually now finally coming to grips with the serious reputational damage that all of this has caused the university, and maybe has forced her out? Maybe they gave her no alternative.
Yeah, they're still flush with cash in their endowment, but the estimates indicate that they're going to lose $1 billion in donations from their alum as a result of being angry about all this.
Yeah, the reputational hit for an institution this old, this venerable, this highly regarded in the higher education space has been enormous. Now, what's going to be interesting, kind of following this storyline along, is not just her stepping down, but what happens throughout the institution. Remember, you had over 1,000 Harvard professors who came out and said she should keep her job. They wanted her there. What's going to happen now that she's gone? How will those professors react? And I think more significantly, in terms of institutional change, what's going to happen deeper down in the organization? What about what's happening in the classroom? What about how DEI has worked its way deeper into the institution, Jackie? This is sort of just the start, in my view.
No, I think that's the big question, to see how the school handles this moving forward. Who do they replace her with? What standards do they put in place to be able to check those tenured professors that we've talked about so many times? But Lydia, you bring up a great point as well. I mean, it wasn't just that testimony, the December 5th testimony that you were speaking to the video of, Brian, was extremely damning when she was talking about certain context in which the students could chant from the river and the sea to the sea, and it would be somehow okay. They were calling for the death and the destruction of Jews and Israel. But then, Lydia, you bring up the plagiarism point as well. And, you know, how do you have a president in place? Let's take the two issues separately. A president in place that is trying to set the standard for students on campus that is being accused of plagiarism not once, but multiple times.
I mean, egregiously, all over the place in the acknowledgments of the articles and the books that she wrote, Lydia. Yeah,
I mean, and the sidestepping and the excuse writing that they were doing to try to justify the work that she had produced, her body of work that included that documented instances of plagiarism. You know, when you talk about, Brian, the curriculum that has been seeped into the classrooms of Harvard, you know, one question I have is, you know, like you said, what are they going to do about it? But are they going to acknowledge the foreign sources of funding that have been flowing into the university for many years? Is that going to be, are we going to see perhaps a new interim or a new president, once they find the person that's going to fill this role, addressing that head on? Because that is an issue that is affecting not just Harvard, that is an issue that is affecting many prestigious universities, Ivy Leagues across the country, that probably is responsible for shaping the curriculum that is influencing and shaping the minds of our young American students today.
Well, and don't forget this, the same overseers who are in place now and apparently are part of this decision for her to leave were the ones who picked her. Were the ones who created the tone and the culture that gave rise to this. Is that same group of people going to lead the search for the next president? And if it is, if they are, is it going to be any different? I mean, the question of who's next is not just a question of who, but how is that person selected? According to what criteria? Who's involved with that? And what does that say about where the institution's going?
Well, there are two different ways this can go. They can make a hard turn and try to say, we're going to clean up our act, we're going to change our image, we're going to do things differently moving forward. This is going to be not the same old Harvard, but you also have to wonder, Brian, if the people who have been turned off as a result of this are permanently turned off and just kind of feel disconnected with the school. I mean, how does somebody like Bill Ackman move past this? To a certain degree, you want to see him, if they do change direction, move past it and sort of get back on board to preserve the institution, because there is something historic about Harvard.
Right.
But having said that, a lot of people have just felt that this went way too far. And the crazy part of all of this was that the university had the opportunity to correct this from the get-go. We've always said, whether it was Bud Light, whether it was Target in the business realms, right? All these companies have had an opportunity to say, mea culpa, we made a mistake, we're sorry. Some of, Bud Light chose to make that hard turn and start doing different kinds of ads, but never really said sorry.
Yes.
And therefore never got some of its consumers back on board. And so
They
I wonder,
didn't believe them, right? They just didn't believe them.
If you just kick Claudine Gay out or force her to resign or whatever it is, the circumstances that prompted this news tap in today, are people going to feel like it's coming from a place of change or just the same old that we've seen?
I think that's a great question, and I think that's going to be a harder question to answer than just, oh, the president's gone, people buy it, Lydia. I think that the backlash is deep here.
Yeah, I mean, we're already seeing the reporting that applications are down at Harvard. We also have interviewed on this very program, college counselors, recruiters who help students gain admission to prestigious institutions like Harvard, saying, the donations required to kind of get your foot in the door at Harvard have substantially fallen, meaning it's now easier to get into Harvard probably for future years than it has been in previous years because there's not that same type of demand. I just keep coming back to the reputational damage, not just for the likes of Bill Ackman, but as a great point, Jackie. But will students still want to go there? Will parents still be willing to pay the tuition?
Yeah, to your point, the reports were indicating that the applications were down 17%.
Wow.
Maybe that woke the school up because it wasn't just donors pulling back money, but it was people wanting to attend that institution, Brian. I mean, at the end of the day, if nobody wants to go there, what's it worth?
Well, if nobody wants to go there, if nobody wants to give money for people to go there, that's going to be a problem for the institution. I wonder with these donors who said, I'm out, I don't want to give money anymore. Is this a move to kind of placate them at the surface level, to say, hey, you guys spoke, we listened, you didn't like what Claudine Gay said or did, she's out. Now you ought to come on back because we're fixing the problem. I mean, this is, to me, it's a test for the donors. Like, how deep do they want to go in terms of figuring out the problems
We won't
here?
know. We won't know. This is one of those where time will tell as the story develops where Harvard chooses to go next. This is another turning point, pivotal for the institution where it could do the right thing, where it hasn't in the past. We'll see.
Well, and also think about the reaction of the students on campus. Okay, you've got a campus that in many ways is kind of being run by the protest faction. It's being dominated. I mean, the paraphernalia is everywhere. You can see the video we're showing there on the library if you go there right now. What does that group do in response to this?
Yeah.
What happens on campus in the I mean, are they going to say, oh, well, Claudine Gay's out, that's great, we're done protesting, or are they going to amp it up?
It's interesting, though, because you look at the protesters, you think about the kids who are coming up through this system, and to a degree, and I'm not going to sugarcoat this, they've been completely brainwashed by this faculty. And so there may be outrage as a result of this. I'm sure they're going to cry about free speech and all of these things. But I don't really blame them because maybe that's all they know to a degree. That is what they were taught. And that's why we talk about education and reform in this country and why it's so important to really take a hard look of not just what's happening in our universities, but also what's happening in the younger grades as kids are coming up through the system. Because you've got a generation of kids who have legitimately been brainwashed. They're scared to go outside. And this is off the anti-Semitism topic, but they're scared to go outside because they've been taught that the world is going to explode because of climate change. And that's a legitimate fear for them.
Yes.
Yeah. Right from the start, when we started covering the development of all of these protests on campus, I right away started wondering, where are the faculty advisors? You know, I remember when I was in college so many years ago, you had faculty advisors that were overseeing student groups. You had to sign off whenever you wanted to have a demonstration or a protest or a bake sale or what have you. There had to be someone that was taking responsibility for these, for the events that you would see.
Yeah.
And going back to your point, Brian, and I think that's been made, is that yes, the students and what they've been taught is definitely an issue. Are we going to see curriculum development, curriculum change? But what is going to happen with the faculty now on the heels of Claudine Gay's?
Can I just also point out, we've got the video on the screen of when she went to the Hanukkah ceremony. She wouldn't go to that ceremony before, but this year she decided to go and be part of the candle lighting. But Charlie Gasparino joins us on set now. I want to get your reaction.
You could probably see this coming a mile away. I mean, I've had dinner the other night, as you know, in our favorite restaurant with our favorite people, and I said she was a goner. And and here's why. You can't have a situation where the president of the school, the head of the school, embodies the worst aspects of diversity, equity, inclusion. You can't have Harvard being the absolute symbol of that DEI essentially creates this unequal playing field, vastly unequal, not even close, that someone who plagiarizes, someone who can't speak on her feet about and say simply that, Jew hatred is bad on campus, somebody who has academic research, once you start looking at it, is pretty flimsy. Listen, I don't have a PhD, but...
And borrowed.
And by the way, good evidence is borrowed, but flimsy. She's not published that much.
Yeah.
She's the embodiment of all that's wrong with DEI.
Yeah.
And if the head of the school is that, then that throws into question just about every credential that Harvard puts out there. So they had to get rid of her. Now, you throw that on top of the fact that people were saying, I'm not giving any more money.
Right.
They're merit. Like, listen, they have a lot. I'm sure they get a lot of foreign sources of money, but when you have like multiple Bill Ackman saying no, and Bill Ackman gave a lot. Yeah. It's just not going to fly. And so she had to go. Now, the real question is, I mean, this is where it gets sort of fascinating for me. Harvard, I mean, yes, I went to the University of Missouri, so I'm a proud state school graduate. And even though it's a good J school, but I didn't graduate from Harvard. But here's the thing this is really sort of underscored, like the bad couple years Harvard has. We do know that Harvard has a dual admissions policy, or it did until the Supreme Court ruled that affirmative action in admissions is wrong. We know that there is one rule for whites and Asians, and there's another rule for black people and people they consider oppressed people.
Yeah.
That's been exposed. On top of that, we have what's been exposed is that there's such an emphasis on diversity there that an unqualified academic runs the place.
Right.
Now, how do you unpack all this? How do you change the faculty? Because it can't just be her. It's got to be throughout
it's
the
got to be
faculty.
much deeper. That's right.
And let me just add to that. When it comes to what was exposed, it was also that if you were white and you were a donor, there were seats set aside for you as well. So some of those rules went.
What do you mean by that?
They were talking about like the percentage of applications of people, what the threshold was to kind of secure a threshold donation was to kind of secure a seat. It was $20 million. That's now dropped down to $1 or $2 million. They kind of had to reduce the price to get donors to keep coming through the door. But that gives you a sense of what DEI really means to them to a degree. Part of it is just surface and how it looks on the outside, as opposed to, money and money talking.
See,
too. It just exposed all the hypocrisy.
I always made this point, and I made it to Mark Rowan's people. He's the guy that the hedge fund, the sort of private equity, the guy running Apollo private equity, who pushed for Liz McGill and Scott Bach to leave over the same sort of issues. Not competence. Hers was more the anti-Semitism. And I also made this point to Bill Ackman's PR person. What they don't realize is that they gave millions and helped raise millions of dollars for years that created the infrastructure that she embodies.
Yeah.
You cannot, just because you get rid of Liz McGill and Bach and her, doesn't take out that absurd and disgusting infrastructure that promotes Jew hatred, that promotes unequal admissions, that promotes two standards. So you're going to have to, if they really are serious, if Bill Ackman is serious, if Mark Rowan is serious, They got to drill into the
That's
faculty.
the key. That's the key.
Charlie, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Great